Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. We're going to be talking about recapping the second round of the playoffs, as well as the New Year's Eve, New Year's Day-ish bowl games for the Big Ten. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Big things happening. I will keep you guys posted on what's going on around the College Football Playoff National Championship with this show. But that's for then. We're going to talk about now. And by now, I mean New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, all the way up to January 3rd. It has been a heck of a bowl season and postseason for the Big Ten. And we're going to start with the game that I was at, not covering the game. I was being a fan, but I got to go to the Rose Bowl, where I thought we would get a competitive game between the number one team in the country, the Oregon Ducks, and the number 8 seed Ohio State. An all Big Ten showdown, a rematch of what I thought was the best regular season game in October. Was a 1-point win. I thought Oregon had a good shot to win this game going into it, but I picked Ohio State to win. I thought it'd be relatively close. 41-21, and the score was not the game was not as close as the score. The game wasn't as close as the score. Ohio State has turned into Death Star Ohio State. And I don't know if they can keep it up. As a fan, I hope they can. But there's a lot of narratives coming out of this game. Oregon, came up short again. And I'll talk about Oregon in a minute. The teams with the byes, they didn't do as well. Yada yada yada. I think there's still I have questions about, is the flu rumor, is that really true? There are rumors that Oregon might have had the flu before the game. I don't know. I'm gonna just say this. I don't think the layoff was a big part of this. I think a lot of people, especially with bye teams going 0-4, I think a lot of people are looking at this and they're saying, well, was it the layoff? Was it this? Was it that? I think that the summary of this game is simple. Ohio State has turned into a buzzsaw recently, and they are going to be a tough out because they have the best roster left in the field. And that's not to say that they can't get beat. We'll talk about that. I'm going to drop another episode later this week about the semifinal games. But the reality is, we always knew Ohio State could get to this level. They're finally getting there. And that's my biggest takeaway, is that they have finally figured out, after the abysmal loss to Michigan, they have figured out how to utilize their pieces, and they are playing more to their potential. Jeremiah Smith is playing up to his potential in big games now. And remember, he's playing good corners. Dante Manning, Jabbar Muhammad. Yes, Jabbar Muhammad's 5'9". He's a shorter corner. He's still really good. And in that first game, they challenged those receivers physically. In this game, they were out-physicaled, they were outgunned, they were outmanned. Jeremiah Smith in triple coverage didn't matter. Jeremiah Smith in space, Jeremiah Smith on a go route, Jeremiah Smith against safety help. And then, by the way, Emeka Egbuka was phenomenal. The offensive line played really well. And this is with Jordan Birch being back in the lineup. They just could not do anything to slow down this offense. But to me, the bigger takeaway isn't just the offense, it's the defense. And this is why I say I don't think it was the layoff. Oregon did not know they didn't know what was coming. They didn't know how to play this defense because they completely changed it from back when they played, 6 weeks ago, 7 or 9 weeks ago, however many times they played. And I look at what Ohio State did defensively. They had Caleb Downs kind of playing in that middle of the field, just kind of watching what Dylan Gabriel was doing. Gabriel was confused for almost the entire first half. And it's a credit to this offense, to Oregon's offense, that they were able to get anything going, because they were, Gabriel was able to escape the pocket. He was able to evade pressure. But if not for that, you probably are talking about a shutout, because Gabriel couldn't get anything from the pocket. Like he had to wait for guys to get open. He had to wait to be able to throw in windows. And by the time that guys started coming open, the defensive line was winning. And so my takeaway, there's a couple takeaways. One is that it's easy to look at Oregon and be like, well, were they really the number one team? Yes, they were the number one team in the country. I still believe that they were one of the top 2 teams in this tournament. If they were playing Texas next week, I would pick Oregon to beat Texas. They are a really good football team. But I think a couple things. One, Jordan James went out of that game early. Evan Stewart didn't play because of an injury pregame. I don't think that changes the outcome, but it certainly it didn't give you all your horses. So I think that, particularly Evan Stewart being out, I don't think Jordan James mattered, because you saw the first 7 or 8, I think he had 7 carries and he was completely ineffective. Like he did not, they couldn't run the ball, period. -29 rushing yards, which is insane. But I think more importantly, I think this is more about Ohio State hitting their stride on defense, on offense, even special teams. Jaden Fielding really came through, 2 big field goals in that first half. And this is going to be, if Ohio State can continue to play like this, it's a no-brainer. They're the national champion. The question is, can they keep it up? That's, I think, my big takeaway is, okay, you've done it for 2 games in a row. Now, can you play a team that is somewhat similar to Michigan and how they're constructed? Strong on the lines. They want to run the football. They want to use play action. Can they deal with that? Can they deal with that? And we'll talk about that later on this week. But what a showcase for Ohio State. And I think if your takeaway is Oregon's not that good, they didn't have a good season. Listen, they won the Big Ten their first year in the league. They beat Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. Like, let that sink in. In the regular season, they beat the top 3 teams in the league, and they had the best season out of any of the Pac-12 teams that came in, including their rival Washington. And if we were still in a 4-team world, they're not playing Ohio State. They're playing probably a rematch of the Big Ten championship game, or they're playing Texas, and they're probably winning the national championship. And so it was a bad time for Oregon to be as good as they were. Is my takeaway. And they ran into Ohio State at a bad time. I think that's ultimately my takeaway for Oregon. I'll move to Penn State, Boise State. This game kind of went the way I thought it would. I said Penn State, Boise was going to be the biggest margin of victory in the second round of the playoffs. I was wrong, just because I had no feel. I didn't get the feel right for Ohio State and Oregon. But I thought Penn State did a really good job of limiting Ashton Genty. They took him away for the most part. He still had 100 yards, but it was on 30 carries, averaged 3.5 yards per carry. I think that's the best any defense has done against Genty. And they made Madsen, although he threw for over 300 yards, they turned him over 3 times. Penn State ran the ball well, 41 carries, 216 yards. Katron Allen had a big day with 134 yards on his own. And then Tyler Warren was a stud. 6 catches, 63 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now, I still feel like Drew Aller has not played his best. And I am a little concerned, particularly with some of the injuries in this game. Abdul Carter came out with an injury, and he was not He didn't play in the second half, and that's when Boise State really started to make advances. But at the end of the day, a couple things that stood out. One is that I tweeted out, Penn State let Boise State hang around, and that's exactly what you don't want to do. And in the fourth quarter, it kind of felt like Boise State kind of still could be in it. And then all of a sudden, Penn State did shut the door. They did what they needed to do to shut the door on an overmatched team, which I thought was right. And I thought that was good. And I thought it showed growth for Penn State. I wish they had done it sooner, because in all watching that game, I kept thinking, come on, guys, you can do this sooner. You can do this sooner. But I felt like, again, Drew Aller did not necessarily play his best game. But then you got to the end of the game. Katrin Allen had, that big touchdown. It was Singleton. Singleton had that 58-yard touchdown run. And then Boise State throws an interception, punt, interception, and it was over. Like it was over once that touchdown run happened. And so Penn State did what they needed to do. They kind of squeezed on Boise State. They finished the game off. And I thought they played a good game. I'm a little concerned, again, offensively, especially as they play against Notre Dame. But I still, I think if you look at this game and you're like, well, Boise State, they didn't have time to get ready, or they had too much time off, and that's why Penn State won. No, Penn State was the better team. Penn State's the better team. Like, you saw that with the run defense. Now, you can say that maybe Penn State, they had an advantage. Maybe. But I still think Penn State was able to shut down their main workhorse in Genty. And I think we all knew if you could shut down or slow down Genty, you had a really good shot of winning. And Penn State has the personnel to do it. So this game played out almost exactly how I thought. I just thought they'd be able to slam the door sooner. I thought maybe early fourth quarter, late third quarter, they'd be able to make it a 3-score lead, and then maybe make it a 4-score lead by the end. I don't think that means that Boise State didn't belong. I just think it means that this is, group of 5 teams are going to do well in the playoff depending on matchups. Like, how they do is going to be dependent on matchups. If Boise got Clemson, right? Like, if they got Clemson first round, like, Boise State's probably winning, right? I just think Penn State was a really bad matchup for them. So, do I think I think my question for Penn State moving forward is, how are they going to do as they move up in competition with a Notre Dame team that just went to war with Georgia? And that's not saying that I think Georgia is all world. It's more saying sometimes you don't know how you're going to do against an upgrade in competition, and you don't have a feel for it, whereas the other team does, because Notre Dame had to deal with a much better front, if we're being honest. But I do like Penn State and the matchups that the Notre Dame game I think might provide them. So let me move to the bowl games, because I think the bowl games show, I think, the relative strength of the Big Ten. And I want to be very clear that bowl games you have to take with a grain of salt, because of all the opt-outs, because of all, just the way that they're constructed now. So you can't just say, well, the Big Ten beat the SEC, so the Big Ten's better. You can't do that. There's too much nuance. You have to really consider that. However, there is a lot that we can take from these games and these programs as they move into next season. And I do think there is an overall takeaway that you can make, which is the Big Ten is not inferior to the SEC anymore. And I think that was clear as day. And I'm going to start with the game that I think proved it the most, which was Michigan, Alabama. Now, I don't know how many opt-outs for Alabama there were. It certainly wasn't their whole defensive line, which, by the way, that's pretty much what happened with Michigan. No Kenneth Grant, no Mason Graham, no Josiah Stewart, no Will Johnson. We knew that. No Donovan Edwards. We knew that. And by the way, a quarterback who tore his ACL during the game, right? So they lost Davis Warren halfway through the second half. So that's who you're down. And they hold Alabama to 13 points and they win the game. Talk about a season. I mean, what a season for Michigan, how they ended. They beat Ohio State and now they beat Alabama. And you've got all this juice going into next season now. I think Michigan is in great shape for next season. And you have a lot of momentum because while Alabama is certainly not the Alabama of Nick Saban lore, they still had a lot of talent. And there is no rhyme or reason that Alabama couldn't have taken this game over, except that they kind of took the same bait that Ohio State did, which is almost more inexcusable because it's like, you saw it on film. What are you doing? Now, I will give a caveat here that the rainstorm really helped Michigan at the beginning of the game. It rained and poured for, I think, the first quarter and maybe the first quarter and a half. I forget when the rain stopped. And that really neutralized things. And it did make things difficult for Alabama throughout the game because the turf was so slick. But listen, there's no reason why Michigan on their third string running back, no Khalil Mullings either, by the way, with a third string running back who is really good. Jordan Marshall's going to be a stud, by the way. But there's no reason why Michigan should have been able to hold this Alabama offense to 13 points, but they did. And I think there's two tales here. One is that Alabama without Nick Saban is not the same Alabama. They're not. That's not meant to denigrate what Michigan did. It's more to say the SEC is not the SEC of the past. And so we have to stop treating them that way. And also, Michigan was better, and I think the Big Ten overall was better than people give it credit for. And I think it's going to bear out in some of these other games. Michigan played a lot of their second string in this game, and they were able to hold up, and they were able to compete. Like, at no point during this game did I think, man, Michigan's getting lucky. I'm like, no, like, they're better. Now, I think they got lucky. They're particularly better on defense. Offensively, they struggled. And I think without that rainstorm, we might be talking about a close loss. But they took advantage of it. They took advantage of the turnovers. They took advantage of the bad weather. And they made Alabama pay. And I think that gives them a ton of confidence for next season. This team is a playoff team next year, or a playoff contender next year. And especially with Mikey Keene coming in, that they're generating a lot of hype with some of their other transfers. I think Michigan's in really good shape next year. Another team that I think is in great shape next year is Illinois, who beat South Carolina. And again, they took it to South Carolina. Josh McCray had 13 carries for 114 yards and 2 touchdowns. Beatty, who was playing kind of more in relief for Pat Bryant, 4 catches for 90 yards. And yes, South Carolina had a defensive lineman opt out who's going to be a first-round pick. They still got loads of guys who are NFL caliber prospects on that defensive line, high NFL prospects on that defensive line for South Carolina. So it's not like they didn't go in with a quarter of a deck. Like they were pretty well loaded. And the South Carolina team, who everybody said deserved to be in the playoff, got beat by Illinois. Now, I thought Brett Bielema was a little, he was taking advantage of a loophole in the rules, which I thought the refs should have called out. They didn't really call it out. But you know what? Brett Bielema got in the head of Shane Beamer because he's a good coach. Remember, coaching is part of this. It's not just about talent. But Illinois proved they've got talent too. The Altmaier played well despite all the pressure. I thought the defense made Sellers look really average on the other side of the ball. Like we've been hearing all year long about Lenora Sellers, how good he is, Heisman hype for next year. Listen, I see the tools. The tools are there, but Illinois made him look average. Defensively, they played great. I thought offensively, they played well when they had to, and they get a huge win, and they might finish the season ranked in the top 15. And man, what a story. What a season for Brett Bielema, when a lot of people, they're saying a bowl game will make this season successful. Well, they made a bowl game. They got 10 wins. Like, congratulations, Illinois. And by the way, I think I deserve a lot of credit because I picked against you like every week, knowing that if I pick against you, you're going to win. So I deserve at least maybe 1% of the credit there. But in all seriousness, I think what a job that Brett Bielema has done. And they're bringing so many of these guys back. They're bringing back most of their offensive line. They're bringing back a good chunk of their defense. They're bringing back Luke Altmaier. This is a team that's going to compete for the Big Ten next year. They're going to compete for a playoff spot next year. What a job that Brett Bielema has done. Just unbelievable. I'll talk about Minnesota briefly. This was, I thought my biggest lock was Minnesota's going to beat Virginia Tech. And I turned on the game. It was 7-0. And I was like, oh my gosh, don't, PJ Fleck, I've supported you for the first time. Don't make me look like an idiot. And PJ Fleck, you did a great job of not only making me not look like an idiot, but also taking that mayo bath like a champ. Minnesota looked really good against Virginia Tech. Now, I don't think Virginia Tech was great, but Minnesota, I thought, just did such a great job of doing what they do well. I thought Brosmer played well. I thought Darius Taylor played well. I thought their mix of run and pass was excellent. And their defense just played so stout against a Virginia Tech offense that really isn't great. But what has Minnesota struggled to do over the past several seasons? Win the easy ones, win the layups. And I'm not saying Virginia Tech was a layup, but it was kind of like a mid-range jumper in that it's a shot that you should be able to make routine, right? It's not as easy for sure. And maybe it's contested, but like it's something that you should make. That's what this game should have been for Minnesota. And it was. They dominated the game. And, my only complaint is it didn't feel like they put it away. They got the field goal late to make it 24-10, or in the fourth quarter, they got it to push it 24-10. And then they didn't score anymore. And that's fine. I wish they would have put another score on there to kind of put it out of reach. But at the end of the day, like Minnesota, after the disastrous start against UNC and the ways that they struggled, they finished 8-5. Phil Steele picked Minnesota to go 15th, and I think Phil Steele has a really good mind for how he sees teams, and he picked Minnesota to go 15th in the league, and instead they went 8-5. Really good season for Minnesota. Really good season for Minnesota. And I think PJ Fleck has kind of found, he's been there for a while, but I think he really has been a good coach for Minnesota. I've given him a lot of junk, but he's elevated that program. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for the way that he's elevated them. So I just hats off to him. Hats off to Minnesota for a great year, finishing 8-5. I do want to talk about Washington real quick. And I hate to be a downer. But I'm going to be a downer. Jedd Fisch, I want to, what I get frustrated by, and you've heard me say this, coaches kind of are who they are, and they do. What bothers me is when you know who they are and they never change. I'll contrast that. I think Ryan Day right now has changed a little bit in this playoff run. I think he's looser. I think he's changed the messaging, which is this. It's not about we got to beat this team. It's we want to play another week, and like we want to play together as another week. That's motivating because like if we don't win, I think the motivation. I think he's changed scheme both on defense and offense. He's changed his decision making. So far. Jedd Fisch, I feel like, continues to make the same mistakes. And I'll just point out the last drive. They score a touchdown. It took them 6 plays and a call that, you know, I wouldn't say it's ticky-tack, but it was, I don't know if you call that, to give them first down after 4th down at the 2. And it took them another 3 downs to then score. Pretty much the end of the game. And it says, we're going for 2. And like, it felt, I think it was Washington State, where it was the same thing where it's like, we're going for the win now, and they don't get it. And it's like, what are you doing, dude? Like, go to overtime. You probably have the better roster. Just go to overtime. But instead he does that. But I think what's worse is you just saw your offense struggle inside, I think, the 5-yard line 6 straight plays, or maybe inside the 6-yard line, something like that. And you're not able to get in except the last play. And you're going to take your chances on a 2-point play now. What are you thinking? Like, what are you doing, man? And I think, I don't know what Jedd Fisch is thinking, but I'm concerned about the trajectory of Washington after this year because they've got talent, but they are not well coached. And I feel like that's my takeaway every single time I watch them play, is that they are not well coached. And Louisville's a good team. They're 9-4. They didn't have their quarterback. And I'm like, man, you're letting, I know, I get it. Like, backup quarterbacks can do some work, but they didn't have their top guy. And you let Louisville torch you. You turn the ball over. I don't get it. And I think if you're Washington, you're left wondering, is this the right guy? Is this the right approach? So I don't know. I'm not saying fire Jedd Fisch. It's year 1. But if I am a Washington fan, I go into next year with some trepidation, because I think the promise of Jedd Fisch right now, it feels like it was overpromised and underdelivered. So that's my take on that. Let me get out of here on this, but I think the bowl season for the Big Ten has been great. The Big Ten has 2 teams in the college football playoff. They have 2 teams, which I think they both have really good shots to advance. So we could be looking at an all Big Ten national championship game. So I think if you are a Big Ten fan, you're listening as a Big Ten listener, I think overall, what a season it's been for the Big Ten. And you look at the way, looking at how the Big Ten has done, I'll just do quick math here. 3-1, 4-1, 4-2, 4-3, 5-3, 6-3, 7-3, 7-4, 8-4, 8-5, 9. They're 9-5 in bowl season thus far. And that's including playoff games. And obviously the Big Ten went 1-1 in the Ohio State Oregon game. 9-5. And if you look at their record against the SEC, they've lost one game against the SEC, which is their prime competition, right? Ohio State beat Tennessee. USC beat Texas A&M. Missouri beat Iowa. That's the one loss. And then Michigan beat Alabama. Illinois beat South Carolina. And Ohio State faces Texas. If Ohio State beats Texas, they're 5-1 against the SEC. And even if Ohio State loses, they're 4-2. I still think it's a great season for the Big Ten. So a lot of good football being played in the Big Ten, and a lot of fan bases that should be very, very excited and proud of their teams. And so appreciate you guys joining me on the journey. And so hopefully you guys have a great start to 2025. Thanks for listening. Take care. God bless.